never meant to spend the fall in an abandoned schoolhouse on the outskirts of a forgotten town in southern Chile. But when my graduate advisor told me there was untouched material in the village of Quelmo, old folklore, handwritten records, oral histories, I saw it as a rare opportunity. A research grant and a long flight later, I arrived with a duffel bag, a camera, and a recorder that barely worked. Quelmo wasn't even on most maps. A cluster of wooden homes scattered along the edges of a dry riverbed, nestled between wind-scoured hills. The schoolhouse had been converted into a guest cabin of sorts, though no guests had come in years. It was offered to me by the town's mayor, who also ran the market and served as the local mechanic. I never saw another foreigner while I was there. The building itself leaned slightly to the right, like it had given up trying to stand straight. The roof was rusted tin, the windows latticed with spider webs that didn't catch anything anymore. Inside, the floor groaned with every step, but the rooms were warm and dry. I set up my equipment and tried to settle into a rhythm. The first week was productive. I interviewed the oldest residents about the shadow roads, paths they swore, twisted on their own at night, and stories of the one who waits in the ravines after sunset. I didn't take the myths seriously, of course. To me, they were metaphors for isolation and forgotten heritage. My job was to record, not believe. One evening, about 10 days in, I was editing an audio file in the main room when someone knocked. It was late, nearly midnight. The town didn't stay awake past 8. I froze, unsure I'd even heard it. Then it came again. 3 sharp knocks, not rushed, but deliberate. I stepped to the door and peeked through the slats of the old wooden blinds. A man stood there, shoulders hunched against the wind, wearing a thick poncho and a broad hat soaked from drizzle. He didn't speak. He just looked at the door. I opened it a crack. "Hola?" His voice was gravel-thick and oddly formal. "Perdí el camino. I've lost the way." I asked if he needed help or if he was from Quelmo. He shook his head no to both. He didn't ask to come inside, and I didn't offer. I pointed toward the town's main road and told him to follow it uphill, to the mayor's house. He stared at me for another few seconds. His eyes were pale, almost gray in the dark. Then he nodded once and walked away. I watched him until he vanished past the old bell tower, then closed the door and went back to work. Something about the encounter unsettled me, but I brushed it off. Rural places had odd rhythms. People showed up out of nowhere sometimes. It was part of the charm, I told myself. The next morning, I found muddy footprints around the back of the schoolhouse. They circled the building once, then disappeared toward the forest. There had been no rain that night. No one had reason to be back there. I checked my camera equipment. Nothing was missing, but I couldn't shake the unease that settled in my chest. That night, I locked all the doors and double-checked the windows. Still, I barely slept. The wind moved strangely outside, and once or twice I thought I heard something. Footsteps? Whispering? I told myself it was the building settling. Old wood creaks. That's all it was. But on the third night, just after I turned off the lights, the knocking returned. 3 knocks. The same cadence. The same pause after. I didn't move. I stayed perfectly still in my bed, barely breathing. After a long minute, I slipped out from under the blanket and crept toward the front window. The man was back. But this time, he was standing a little farther away, just outside the edge of the porch light. I could barely make out his face, but he was definitely staring at the house. "Estoy perdido," he said again, though softer this time, almost under his breath. Then, after several long moments, he turned and vanished into the shadows. The following day, I told the mayor what had happened. He listened, then stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. "That man doesn't come from here," he said simply. "Then where?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he gave me a phone number and told me to call it if I saw the man again. I asked who it belonged to. He just said, "Someone who knows how to help." That night I kept every light on. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, my recorder running on the table, heart pounding every time the wind changed direction. Hours passed in silence. Then, around 3:30 in the morning, I heard footsteps on the roof. Not rats, not the wind. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate. I grabbed my phone, heart slamming against my ribs, and dialed the number the mayor had given me. A woman picked up after a single ring. "He's on the roof," I whispered. She didn't ask who I was. She just said, "Do not leave the house, do not look up." "What does he want?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment, then, "Not you. Not exactly." The line went dead. Outside, the footsteps moved slowly from one end of the building to the other, stopping above the back room. Then came 3 knocks, this time from the ceiling, directly above my head. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee into the night. But something told me if I stepped outside, I'd never come back. Eventually, just before dawn, the sound stopped. I waited until full sunlight streamed through the windows before I opened the door. Nothing. No footprints. No sign anyone had been there. I packed that morning. Before I left, the mayor met me at the edge of the town. "He always finds the ones who come to listen," he said. "It's better not to ask why." As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The schoolhouse stood quiet as though none of it had happened. But somewhere deep in my files, buried between hours of interview recordings, there's a 20-second clip I can't explain. I didn't remember recording it. I never pressed the button. It's a voice, low, breathless, perdí el camino, perdí el camino, perdí el camino. I deleted it once, it came back. Every time I try to erase it, the file reappears, on a new device in a different folder, always at 3:30 a.m., always with those same words. I've stopped trying, and I've never, not once, looked up at my ceiling when I hear the creak in the night. They say the old bus depot down on Lamont Street is cursed. I never believed that kind of thing. Just urban folklore used to keep kids from snooping around empty places. But I worked the night watch there for 7 months, and I can tell you, now, something was wrong with that place. It wasn't even a functioning depot anymore. Just a block-long building with cracked pavement and hollowed-out ticket booths, tucked behind a closed-down hardware store and a condemned laundromat. The city kept it technically open as a storage site, which meant they needed someone to watch it. That someone was me. Third shift, 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., 5 nights a week. No one ever came by except the occasional maintenance crew or a stray delivery that got misrouted. The first month was quiet. I brought a book, sometimes watched movies on my phone. There was a cot in the office if I wanted to nap. Easy pay, no stress. But after a while, the quiet started to feel off. Like the silence was waiting for something. One Thursday night around 2 a.m., I went outside to smoke. I always took the back door. It opened up to the old bus lot, now a slab of cracked asphalt with rusted-out poles and broken floodlights. That night, I noticed one of the windows in the adjacent storage wing flickering with light. I froze. There shouldn't have been any lights on in that wing. Nobody else had a key. At first, I figured it was a trick, maybe my eyes catching a reflection from the main road. But when I stepped forward, the light blinked again. A brief, wandering beam, like someone was sweeping a flashlight across the floor inside. I stared for a while, expecting to see it again. Nothing. No sound. No movement. I walked around the building to double-check the gate, still padlocked. Back inside, I sat down at the front desk. Maybe it was a short in the wiring, I told myself. Maybe the place was just settling. Old places creak and groan. But I couldn't shake that flicker, not for the rest of the night. 2 nights later, something else happened. I'd just brewed a cup of coffee when I heard a muffled thud, not loud, just enough to pull my attention to the far wall. The direction of that storage wing. I waited. Heard it again. A soft tap, then another. Like someone knocking gently, but not with a hand, with something metallic. I got up and stood, still, listening. It stopped. Then about 20 minutes later, the front entrance chimed. It's one of those old-fashioned sliding doors that beeps when it opens. I looked up, surprised. It's rare to get anyone that late, let alone a walk-in. Man stepped inside, mid-50s, maybe older, wiry build, sunken eyes. He looked like someone who'd been living rough for a while. His coat was threadbare, pants stained, shoes worn down to the sole. He didn't speak, just looked around slowly, like he wasn't sure where he was. His gaze landed on me for a second, too long. "Need help with something?" I asked. He didn't answer. Didn't even nod. Just stood there. After a few more seconds, he turned and walked out, silent as he came. I stood behind the counter, completely still. That's when the hairs on my arms stood up. I realized his boots didn't make a sound on the floor. The place echoed even when I walked. But him? Nothing. I locked the door. The next night, just after 1 in the morning, I took my break in the company van. I'd started keeping my lunch there. Felt safer somehow. I parked at the far end of the lot, with a view of both the depot entrance and the alley that looped around the old laundry. While I was eating, I noticed 2 figures round the corner of the building. One of them was that same silent man from before. I recognized his coat. The other was bigger, broader. They moved with purpose, not like people out for a stroll. The bigger one held something, a long flashlight, or maybe a crowbar. I couldn't tell. They didn't see me. They walked right into the depot through a side door I must have forgotten to relock. They moved fast, like they knew exactly where to go. A minute later, I saw the glow of their flashlight flickering through the windows of the main lobby. I ducked, heart pounding, and pulled out my phone. Called the police. From where I crouched in the van, I watched as the 2 men stepped behind the counter. They looked through drawers, then went down the hallway toward the office. I could see the beam of the flashlight dancing across the walls. Less than a minute later, they came back out. No money in hand, no equipment, nothing stolen. They weren't robbers. They were searching for me. They ran out the way they came and disappeared around the back. When the officers arrived, they searched the building, found the broken side door and, more disturbing, signs of forced entry in the far storage wing, the one where I'd seen that light. They never caught the men. No fingerprints, no leads. But I'm certain of one thing now. That first guy, the one who came in silently, he was scouting, checking to see if I was alone. Maybe confirming I was real. And if I hadn't taken my break in the van that night, I might have found out exactly what they were after. I quit the job a week later, got a new gig at a bookstore downtown. No overnight shifts, no empty buildings, no unexplained lights, and I never drove past Lamont Street again. I was 16 when we moved into the old performance school. Not because we wanted to, but because we didn't have anywhere else to go. After Dad disappeared, Mom scraped together whatever work she could. She ended up landing a short-term job as a night caretaker at a shuttered arts academy. And part of the deal was that we could stay in the top-floor dormitories while the property was being reassessed for renovation or demolition. It was a temporary fix for a permanent problem. The school sat on the edge of town where no buses ran, and the nearest neighbor was a boarded-up library. The building looked like something out of a history book. Red brick, wide arches, dusty, windows, and an old iron gate that creaked like it had feelings. Most of the lights didn't work. The heat was inconsistent. The pipes made sounds like the place was breathing, and I hated it. Not because it was creepy, though it definitely was. I hated it because I knew what it meant, that we were barely holding things together. Mom tried to make it seem like an adventure. She called it camping with walls. But there's nothing fun about peeling paint, broken tiles, or a hallway that smells like mildew and varnish. My little brother Caleb didn't mind. He was 11 and still had that invincibility that comes with being a kid. To him, the cracked mirrors and drafty rooms were part of some game. But me? I couldn't shake the feeling that the place had been left behind for a reason. The school had been closed for over a decade. Some kind of funding scandal, followed by a fire in one of the practice wings. The scars were still there. Charred beams, soot-stained ceilings. No one ever cleaned it up. It was like time just gave up trying. We stayed in the third-floor dorms down the hall from what used to be the girls' sleeping quarters. The doors were all open, as if the last group of students had packed up in a rush and never came back. Sometimes I'd find stray items, an old shoe, a comb with a few hairs still tangled in it, scraps of sheet music, dusty photos half torn. Each room had its own story, but none of them spoke clearly. That night, 3 weeks after we moved in, I fell asleep late. I'd been scrolling through my phone under the covers trying to block out the occasional thump or pipe hiss. It wasn't unusual for the building to make noise. Most nights I wrote it off. But this night felt different. Somewhere past midnight I woke up. Not from a sound exactly, more like a stillness that felt too deliberate. I pulled out one earbud and sat up. Then I heard it. Creak. Pause. Creak. Pause. Not fast, not heavy. Careful. Like someone was moving step by step across an old wooden floor. But it wasn't coming from the hallway outside my room. It was above me. The performance hall had a massive catwalk system up in the rafters, built so tech students could manage lights and curtains during shows. It was directly overhead. At first I thought it had to be an animal, maybe a raccoon, but the sound was too measured, too human. I got up, checked on Caleb. His bed was empty. That punched the air right out of my lungs. I whispered his name down the hallway. Nothing for a second. I convinced myself he was in the bathroom. But I had a feeling, one I couldn't shake, and it pulled me downstairs like a thread tugging on my spine. The performance wing was sealed off with yellow tape and an official-looking sign, unsafe, no entry. The door was supposed to be locked, but it hung slightly open, tape torn, no key needed. I stepped inside. The air changed immediately, colder, heavier. My footsteps echoed even when I tried to stay light. The main stage stretched ahead like a decayed memory. Its wooden floor was warped in places and blackened by fire damage in others. The spotlight stands were still up top, though most were cracked or dangling at strange angles. Then I saw him. A man high above the stage, walking the catwalk. He moved slowly, each step landing with a creak that echoed in the silence. He didn't look down, didn't hesitate, just walked, reached the end, turned, walked back, over and over, and then he sat, legs swinging gently over the edge, like he was waiting for something. I ducked behind a row of seats, shaking, trying to process what I was seeing. That's when I heard a shuffle from behind the curtain. I crept closer, careful not to let the boards betray me. There was Caleb, curled up on the floor, eyes shut, head resting on an old costume box. I touched his shoulder and he stirred, groggy. He told me to wait, he murmured. Who? I asked. Caleb blinked at me, confused. The man up there. He said the show was starting. I didn't waste another second. I scooped him up, phone already out, texting Mom. We made it back to our room without being seen, or so I hoped. By the time Mom and security got there, the man was gone. No sign of anyone on the catwalk. No footprints, no broken locks, just an old building settling in the dark. They tried to explain it away. Sleepwalking, imagination, trauma response. But none of that explained what Caleb said, or why the man never looked down, or why he sat night after night waiting like the performance was about to begin. We left 2 days later. Mom found another job. something with less decay and fewer secrets. But the memory clings to me, not like a nightmare, more like an unfinished script, because sometimes, when I can't sleep, I think about that figure above the stage, still walking, still waiting, rehearsing lines no one else can hear, for an audience that never comes, and I wonder if the show ever started, or if it was always meant for someone who came back, someone like me.